So Donald Trump just blinked. After months of loudly, publicly, and personally championing steel and aluminum tariffs against Canada, after calling them essential to national security, after mocking anyone who questioned them, after daring Canada to try and fight back, the president has quietly signed an executive order rolling back every single one of them, not modifying them, not adjusting them, not recalibrating them, as the White House press team desperately tried to frame it, rolling them back entirely. Every tariff, every surcharge, every penalty gone. And Warren Buffett just released a 3S sentence statement that may be the most devastating economic verdict of Trump's entire presidency. When you hear what the Oracle of Omaha said about this reversal and what it reveals about America's actual leverage in the global economy, you'll understand why this isn't just a story about steel tariffs. This is the story of a bluff that got called. And the man who made the bluff was the last person on earth to realize it was never going to work. Subscribe now, because the fallout from this is just beginning. Let me take you back to how we got here. Because to understand why this reversal is so devastating, you have to remember how these tariffs were sold. When Trump first announced the 25% steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada, he didn't present them as a trade adjustment. He presented them as a war cry. At rallies in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, he told cheering crowds that Canada had been ripping off the American worker for decades and that he was the only president with the guts to do something about it. He invoked national security, claimed that dependence on Canadian steel was a strategic vulnerability that endangered America's ability to defend itself. He stood in front of American flags and steel workers and said the words that his base wanted to hear. Other presidents let this happen. They let our jobs go. They let our factories close. I'm the one who's finally standing up, and I'm telling Canada the free ride is over. He mocked anyone who warned about retaliation. When reporters asked whether Canada might fight back, Trump laughed it off at a press conference. What are they going to do? They need us more than we need them. Way more. When his own economic advisors privately expressed concern about retaliatory tariffs, he dismissed them. When Canadian officials warned through diplomatic channels that a response was being prepared, the White House publicly brushed it aside. The message from Trump was clear and unambiguous. I'm doing this. Nobody can stop me. And Canada doesn't have the power to make me pay for it. He didn't just impose tariffs. He turned them into a personality test. Supporting the tariffs meant supporting Trump. Questioning them meant being weak, being disloyal, being one of the globalists and elites who had sold out America's workers. The tariffs weren't just trade policy. They were MAGA identity politics in economic form, and Trump's entire political brand reinforced this framing. His base doesn't value him for his policy nuance or his economic sophistication. They value him because he fights, because he never backs down, because he never apologizes. In the Trump universe, losing a fight is survivable. You can blame the refs, blame the deep state, blame the media. But backing down from a fight, admitting you were wrong, there's no spin for that. Backing down is the one thing the strongman brand cannot absorb. He staked his reputation on these tariffs. He made them personal. He dared Canada to try something. And then Mark Carney tried something. Carney, former Goldman Sachs partner, former governor of the Bank of England, former governor of the Bank of Canada, the only person in history to run two G7 central banks, looked at Trump's tariffs and saw exactly what they were, a bluff wrapped in bravado. And he didn't just respond, he responded with a scalpel. Canada's retaliatory tariffs were the most surgically targeted trade response in modern history. Carney didn't slap blanket tariffs on American goods. He went state by state, industry by industry, and targeted the sectors that would cause maximum political pain in the districts of the legislators who supported Trump's strategy. Agricultural products from Iowa and Wisconsin, critical swing states, auto parts affecting Michigan and Ohio, states Trump couldn't afford to lose. Bourbon from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell's home state, a product so culturally and economically important to the state that threatening it was like putting a gun on the negotiating table. Energy sector components affecting Texas, dairy products affecting upstate New York. Every tariff had an address. Every retaliation had a political calculation behind it. Carney wasn't trying to win a trade war. He was trying to make the trade war politically unsurvivable for the people who started it. And then he did something no world leader had done before. He publicly called Trump's tariff strategy a bluff on camera with a calm, measured smile. He called the tariffs economically illiterate and described them as the strategy of a man who doesn't understand how leverage actually works in the modern global economy. And then the pain started. American steel-dependent manufacturers who were supposed to benefit from the tariffs found themselves paying more for raw materials because the tariffs didn't just apply to Canadian imports. They disrupted the entire North American steel supply chain. Construction companies passed the higher cost to consumers, and housing prices in already overheated markets climbed even further. Ford and GM reported tariff-related cost increases of between $1,500 and $2,200 per vehicle. Costs that were passed directly to American car buyers in the form of higher sticker prices. The auto industry, which employs over 1 million Americans directly and supports millions more in related supply chains, was hemorrhaging money on a strategy it hadn't asked for and couldn't escape. But the real devastation hit the agricultural sector. Canada wasn't just a nice-to-have export market for American farmers. It was their largest single customer. When Carney's retaliatory tariffs hit American agricultural products, the damage was immediate and severe. Farmers in Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the Dakotas reported export declines of 25 to 30% within the first 2 months. Grain elevators along the northern borders saw Canadian buyers simply stop showing up. Dairy farmers who had spent decades building relationships with Canadian distributors watched those relationships evaporate in weeks as Canadian buyers switched to European and Australian suppliers who weren't subject to retaliatory tariffs. And here's the part that most Americans didn't see. Those Canadian buyers signed multi-year contracts with the new suppliers. Those contracts don't expire when the tariffs come off. Those customers are gone, and they're not coming back because a president changed his mind. Small businesses along the border, the machine shops, the parts suppliers, the logistics companies, the trucking firms that depend on cross-border trade flowing smoothly were caught in the crossfire with no political influence and no lobbyists to plead their case. They just absorbed the losses and prayed it would end. The tariffs were supposed to help American industry. Instead, American industry was hemorrhaging, and the pain was concentrated exactly where Carney intended, in the swing states and politically sensitive districts that Trump and his allies needed most. The political rebellion started quietly and then erupted. Republican senators from Iowa sent a private letter to the White House requesting an urgent meeting about agricultural losses. When the meeting was delayed twice, the letter leaked, and it was devastating. The senators presented data showing that their state's farmers had lost more income in 8 weeks of retaliatory tariffs than they had gained from 3 years of agricultural subsidies. Michigan's entire congressional delegation, Republicans and Democrats, sent a joint public letter demanding immediate reversal, warning that the auto industry job losses were accelerating. Republican governors in 3 affected states broke ranks and publicly criticized the tariffs, something that almost never happens to a sitting president from their own party. When Republican governors start criticizing a Republican president on economic policy, the strategy isn't failing. It's already failed. Conservative media began to crack. Fox Business ran segments questioning whether the tariff strategy had a viable endgame. MAGA commentators who had spent months defending the tariff started pivoting to "we should have gone harder," which is itself an admission that the strategy as implemented had failed. The base was still loyal in the polls, but the politicians who serve the base, the donors who fund the politicians, and the business leaders who fund the donors were all converging on the same conclusion. This has to stop. Behind closed doors, Trump's own economic advisors presented data showing the tariffs were costing the broader economy roughly $3 in damage for every $1 in tariff revenue collected. Internal polling showed that tariff-related price increases, the kind voters feel every time they fill up their gas tank or buy groceries, were eroding Trump's support in exactly the swing states he needed for the next election. Major Republican donors called the White House with an ultimatum: reverse the tariffs or we redirect our money to Senate races and let the presidential campaign fend for itself. The rally crowd still cheered, but the donor calls were getting shorter and the poll numbers were getting worse. And then the final straw, GM, announced it would be temporarily closing an assembly line in Ohio due to tariff-related cost pressures, with 1,200 jobs affected. The announcement hit during the news cycle like a bomb. Ohio, a swing state. Auto workers, the exact demographic Trump had promised to protect. His inner circle told him what they'd been afraid to say for weeks: the tariffs have to go. And for the first time in this entire saga, Donald Trump listened. The reversal was announced on a Friday afternoon, the classic Washington move for burying bad news when you hope nobody's paying attention. No press conference, no rally, no triumphant speech about winning. A written statement from the White House Communications Office using phrases like strategic recalibration and having achieved the intended objectives. There was no explanation of what those objectives were or how they had been achieved because they hadn't been. Canada made zero concessions. Carney didn't give an inch. The tariffs went up, caused billions in damage, and came back down with absolutely nothing to show for them. And then Warren Buffett made the statement that sealed it. The statement that turned a bad Friday news dump into a permanent mark on this presidency. Buffett rarely comments on specific policy reversals. In 7 decades of investing, he has watched administrations impose and reverse tariffs, raise and lower taxes, expand and contract regulation, and he's almost never weighed in on the individual decisions. He considers most of them temporary noise in a long-term investment landscape, the kind of thing that makes for exciting cable news segments but doesn't fundamentally alter the trajectory of the American economy. He lets the noise pass and keeps his eyes on the long game. That's been his philosophy for 70 years. But today, he made an exception. And the reason he made an exception, according to sources close to Berkshire Hathaway's board, is that he sees something in this reversal that goes far beyond one tariff, one president, or one trade dispute. He sees the end of a myth. The myth that America can use its market size as a budgeon and the rest of the world will simply absorb the blows. Tariffs are taxes, Buffett said. They've always been taxes. You can call them protection. You can call them national security. You can call them whatever makes the rally crowd cheer. But they are taxes paid by American consumers and American businesses. And the only question was how long it would take before the people paying those taxes demanded they be removed. He continued, you can't bluff your way through economics. Markets don't care about bravado. Supply chains don't care about rally speeches. Freight costs don't care about truth social posts. Eventually, the math catches up, and it always, always catches up. And then the third sentence, the one that hit hardest, the one that ricocheted across financial media within minutes and was quoted in every major newspaper by evening. This reversal doesn't fix anything. The damage is done. Billions of dollars lost, business relationships damaged, national credibility spent, and all of it. Every dollar of damage, every lost contract, every factory hour lost, every farmer who watched his biggest customer walk away. All of it for a strategy that anyone with a basic understanding of trade economics could have told you would fail from the very beginning. 3 sentences. No insults, no political language, no partisan positioning, no mention of Trump by name, just the cold mathematical reality that the entire tariff strategy was a bluff, that the bluff got called by a Canadian prime minister who understood economics better than the president of the United States, and that the whole thing collapsed in front of the entire world exactly the way anyone paying attention knew it would. Berkshire's own subsidiaries felt the pain firsthand, which is part of why Buffett was willing to go public. BNSF Railway, Berkshire's massive freight railroad that carries billions of dollars in goods across North America, saw cross-border cargo volumes decline measurably during the tariff period. Berkshire's manufacturing and construction materials divisions absorbed higher input costs that went directly to the bottom line. Clayton Homes, Berkshire's housing subsidiary, faced rising material costs at a time when housing affordability was already a crisis. Buffett had privately expressed frustration to associates for months, telling one longtime friend that the tariffs were the most economically illiterate policy I've seen from a White House in my lifetime, a quote that the friend shared with CNBC after Buffett's public statement. Now, he was willing to say it in front of the world. Berkshire's internal modeling showed a 3-to-1 loss ratio across the broader economy. $3 in economic damage for every $1 collected in tariff revenue. 3-to-1. That's not a trade strategy. That's economic self-harm with a patriotic veneer. It's lighting money on fire and calling it strength. But Buffett's deeper point was the one that should genuinely worry every policymaker in Washington, every trade negotiator, and every strategic planner at the State Department and the Pentagon. The tariffs didn't just fail as policy. They revealed that America's trade leverage, the assumption that America's market is so massive, so essential, so irreplaceable that it can impose any terms, and trading partners will simply comply because they have no alternative, is an illusion. It was always an illusion. It worked as long as nobody tested it. But Carney tested it, and the whole thing fell apart. The assumption was always, we're America, we're the biggest market. Everyone needs access to us, so we can impose whatever conditions we want, Buffett explained. What Carn proved, and what this reversal confirms for anyone still in doubt, is that the leverage isn't what it used to be. Other countries have options. Other markets exist. Alternative supply chains can be built. And when you push hard enough and recklessly enough, your allies don't fold. They adapt. And once they adapt, they don't come back. The bluff worked for years because nobody called it. Carney called it. And the whole thing fell apart in a matter of months. When Warren Buffett says your entire trade strategy was a bluff and the man who called the bluff just made you reverse course without making a single concession in return, the debate is over. Now, let's talk about the fallout, because the damage from this episode extends far beyond steel tariffs and far beyond the U.S.-Canada relationship. The tariffs are gone, but the economic damage remains. Factories that reduce production or close lines during the tariff period don't restart overnight. Farmers who lost Canadian export contracts can't unlose them. Canada signed new multi-year supply agreements with European and Australian producers, and those contracts are binding. Supply chains that were restructured during the tariff period stay restructured. Companies that spent millions diversifying away from cross-border trade don't reverse that investment because the policy changed. Consumer price increases that already happened don't come back down. Prices go up fast and come down slow, if they come down at all. The tariffs lasted months. The damage will last years. And now that they're reversed, there's nothing to show for it. No leverage gained, no concessions won, no strategic advantage secured, just wreckage. But the economic damage may not even be the worst of it, because the reversal struck at the heart of something Trump values more than any policy outcome, more than any economic statistic, more than any trade concession: his brand, his image, the mythology that makes his political movement run. His entire political identity is built on the principle that he never backs down. His base doesn't follow him because of his economic sophistication or his policy nuance. They follow him because he fights, because he's the man who tells the establishment, the media, and the world to go to hell, and never, ever flinches in the Trump universe. Strength isn't defined by outcomes. It's defined by posture. You can lose and still be strong as long as you went down swinging, as long as you never surrendered, as long as you can frame the loss as someone else's fault. Losing is survivable. Backing down is not. The tariffs were presented as the purest expression of that identity. They were proof that Trump would do what other presidents were afraid to do. Proof that he cared about American workers more than about diplomatic niceties or economic orthodoxy. He stood at rallies and said, "I'm fighting for you." And the tariffs were the fight. The reversal destroys that narrative completely. The White House tried every spin in the playbook: strategic recalibration, mission accomplished. We achieved our intended objectives and have chosen to move to the next phase. But the spin collapsed on contact with a question so simple that no advisor, no spokesperson, and no cable news surrogate could answer it. What did we get? What exactly was accomplished? What concession did Canada make? What policy did Carney change? What trade term was renegotiated? The answer in every case is nothing. Canada made zero concessions. Carney didn't adjust a single policy. He didn't modify a single regulation. He didn't give a single inch. The American tariffs went up, caused massive damage to American industries and American consumers over a period of months, and then came back down with absolutely nothing gained in return. That's not a strategic recalibration. That's not mission accomplished. That's a surrender dressed in euphemisms. And everyone from Wall Street analysts to foreign diplomats to the farmer in Iowa who lost his biggest customer can see it. For the first time in this political era, Trump's base isn't unified in its defense of him on a major issue. Some loyalists are spinning furiously, their voices getting louder as the position gets harder to defend. Some are conspicuously silent, which in the MAGA universe is itself a form of dissent. the absence of support where support is expected. And some quietly in private forums and text chains and conversations that don't make the news but shape the movement from the inside are asking the question that Trump has never had to face before: did we just lose? Did we just back down? Conservative commentators who spent months defending the tariffs on every cable news panel and every podcast are now executing an awkward pivot to "we should have gone harder," which is, if you listen carefully, an implicit admission that the strategy as implemented failed. The strongman brand survives losing. It survives chaos. It survives scandal and indictment and investigation. What it has never had to survive, what it was specifically constructed to never have to survive, is backing down. And today, the whole world watched Donald Trump back down. And the global consequences may be the most devastating of all, because every country in the world just received the same unmistakable message. American tariff threats are temporary. If you retaliate hard enough, long enough, and strategically enough, America will reverse course. The playbook is now public. Trump just taught the entire world how to beat him. You don't negotiate with American tariffs. You don't panic. You don't make concessions out of fear. You endure them. You retaliate surgically, targeting the districts and industries where the political pain will be most intense. You maintain public composure so you don't give the American president a villain to rally against. And you wait, because eventually the domestic economics catch up, the polling catches up, the donor calls catch up, and the tariffs come down. The formula is now proven. The case study is complete. The European Union is already incorporating this lesson into its strategic planning. EU trade officials told Reuters within hours that the Canadian president fundamentally changes the calculus for how we respond to American trade threats. China's trade negotiators, who have endured years of American tariffs without the kind of dramatic reversal that just played out, are recalculating whether a more aggressive retaliatory posture might produce faster results. Japan and South Korea, both facing their own tariff pressures from Washington, are studying Carney's surgical targeting methodology with intense interest. Mexico, which has been subjected to on-again, off-again tariff threats for years, now has proof that patience and retaliation work better than capitulation. Future American tariff threats will be met with less fear and more patience, because the president has been set publicly, irrevocably, in front of every camera and trading desk on earth. America blinks. American trade leverage didn't just weaken today, it evaporated. Because leverage only works if the other side believes you'll follow through. And Donald Trump just proved in the most visible and humiliating way imaginable that when the pain comes home, he won't. Mark Carney's response to the reversal was a masterclass in restraint. And the restraint itself was more devastating than any gloating could have been. He didn't mock, he didn't celebrate. He didn't hold a press conference to declare victory. He released a brief, measured, almost clinical statement. Canada will always defend its economic sovereignty and the interest of Canadian workers and businesses. We welcome the return to rational trade policy and look forward to constructive engagement with our American partners. That was it. 2 sentences of diplomatic grace that contained beneath their surface calm the unmistakable message: we won and we both know it. The understatement was the victory lap. By refusing to gloat, by refusing to give Trump a reason to escalate or claim he was being provoked, Carney positioned himself as the adult in the room, the statesman who prevailed through strategy and patience rather than bluster. Canadian approval ratings for Carney surged to 68% in overnight polling, the highest for any sitting prime minister in over a decade. Canadian trust in the U.S.-Canada relationship, however, continued its decline. Canadians believe Carney handled the situation masterfully, but they no longer believe their neighbor to the south is a reliable partner. That's the damage that tariff reversals don't fix. Carney didn't need to say he won. Everyone on earth already knew. So let's zoom out, because this isn't just about one failed tariff strategy or one embarrassing reversal. This is about what today reveals about America's actual position in the global economy. And the revelation is far more damaging than any single tariff. For decades, America operated on a fundamental assumption that was so deeply embedded in Washington's worldview, it was never even questioned. Our market is so large, so essential, and so irreplaceable that we can impose whatever terms we want, and the rest of the world will accept them because they have no alternative. This assumption underpinned every trade negotiation, every tariff threat, every economic sanction. It was America's ace in the hole, the card that always won the hand. And Trump embodied that assumption more completely and more loudly than any president in modern history. We're America, we're the biggest market, everyone needs us, deal with it. But the world has changed in ways that Washington refused to acknowledge. Supply chains have diversified across multiple continents. Alternative consumer markets have exploded. The European Union is a 17 trillion economy. China's middle class now numbers over 400 million people. India is growing at 7% annually. The ASEAN bloc is one of the fastest growing regions on Earth. Digital trade platforms have created new corridors that didn't exist a decade ago. America is still the largest single economy, but largest is not the same as only. And the moment your trading partners realize they have genuine, viable, functioning alternatives, your leverage isn't leverage anymore. It's a bluff, and bluffs only work until someone calls them. The tariff reversal is the proof. When Canada pushed back harder, smarter, and more strategically, and America was the one who broke first. That's not leverage. That's a negotiating position that was tested and found wanting. And this isn't the first time the pattern has played out. It may just be the most visible and the most humiliating. Look at the broader record. Tariffs on China still in place after years, but producing none of the promised manufacturing renaissance, none of the reshoring, none of the grand rebalancing that was supposed to make American workers prosperous again. Trade threats against the EU met with counter tariffs and ultimately walked to a stalemate where neither side got what it wanted. Threats against Mexico, tariff threats made publicly and dramatically, then quietly withdrawn multiple times when the economic and political consequences became clear. The pattern is always the same. Big announcement, loud speeches, promises of imminent victory. Then the retaliation comes, then the domestic pain builds, then the quiet reversal, usually on a Friday afternoon, usually buried in euphemistic language about recalibration and achieved objectives. The only variable is how much damage is inflicted on American workers and American businesses before the inevitable retreat. Canada just established a template that every American ally and rival will study and replicate. Step 1, absorb the initial tariff shock without panicking. Step 2, retaliate surgically, targeting the political pressure points, the swing states, the donor industries, the sectors where job losses make headlines. Step 3, maintain public composure and avoid escalation rhetoric that would give the American president a rallying point. Step 4, wait for domestic American politics to do the work because the math always catches up. The politics always follows the math and the tariffs always come down. Carney didn't just win a trade dispute. He wrote the playbook for defeating American economic coercion, and every country on earth just got a copy. The lesson did not stop at the Canadian border. Policymakers in Brussels are watching. Trade officials in Beijing are recalibrating. Strategic planners in Tokyo, Seoul, Mexico City, Brasilia, and New Delhi are taking notes. The message that just traveled across the globe is simple and unmistakable. American tariff threats are not permanent. They are political instruments with a shelf life. If you can endure the initial shock, retaliate with precision, and wait for domestic pressure to build, the clock begins working in your favor. And the people who absorbed the cost of this lesson were not the architects of the strategy. They rarely are. They were the factory workers in Ohio who saw shifts cut while their representatives defended the tariffs on cable news. The farmers in Iowa who lost their largest export customer and watched those buyers sign multi-year contracts elsewhere. The small manufacturers and trucking companies along the northern border who operated on thin margins and were forced to absorb losses they did not create. American families who paid more for vehicles, groceries, appliances, and building materials, not in theory, but at the checkout counter. All of it for a policy that ended exactly where its critics predicted, in reversal. Donald Trump imposed steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada as a declaration of strength. He framed them as a national security necessity. He sold them as proof that he alone would fight. He dismissed warnings, mocked retaliation threats, and dared Canada to respond. Canada responded. Mark Carney did not escalate rhetorically. He escalated strategically. Retaliation was not broad and emotional. It was targeted and political. Swing states